Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
A key member of Congress got a first-hand look at some Idaho backcountry this week, and he also got a lot of advice on what lands should get official blessing as wilderness. Tonight, what John Seiberling's visit means to the continuing struggle over Idaho's roadless lands. Good evening. Ohio Congressman John Seiberling wound up a 5-day tour of Idaho's backcountry today, reiterating his support for a substantial amount of additional wilderness in Idaho. The 65-year-old Akron Democrat chairs the House Subcommittee on Public Lands, and he is expected to play a major role in drafting that body's version of an Idaho wilderness bill. A version sponsored by the state's all-Republican delegation designating 526,000 additional acres has already passed the Senate, but that number is likely to be increased significantly in the House if a compromise cannot be reached. Seiberling toured more than 20 proposed wilderness sites during his 5-day visit. He'll wind things up tonight at a reception hosted by Democratic Governor John Evans. Tonight we'll look at what advice Seiberling got during his stay here and what his involvement is likely to mean to the eventual shape of wilderness in Idaho. We begin with reports from producers Ann Summerall and Gary Richardson. Summerall was with Seiberling in the Kelly Creek area of northern Idaho on Saturday. Richardson caught up with him today in the Boise National Forest.
70% of the American people favor protecting natural areas through wilderness and parks legislation. This land belongs to them and to their descendants. And I personally feel a very strong obligation to do what I can to recognize their interests too.
Well, we obviously have to try to reach a compromise of viewpoints between not just the people in Idaho. I wish we could make our decision ourselves. But it's very obvious in the Congress of the United States today that the people who don't live in Idaho have an interest in what happens here, and they're going to attempt to tell us what to do.
Concerned citizens waited at the Cayuse Creek landing strip for Chairman Seiberling to discuss the proposed wilderness lands designation. An aerial view of the Clearwater National Forest and a trail tour enhanced Representative Seiberling's background, but he wanted to know more specifics.
I've been doing this for many, many years now, and I could write the script and just leave blanks for the names and figures and fill them in each place I go. I'm familiar with all of the basic arguments, pro and con. But what helps me is when I hear specific information. This drainage, these slopes, this town, how it'll impact a particular mill, how it will destroy a particular stream if we log it. That's the kind of specific information that you get by going around looking and listening.
After a presentation by the Fish and Game Department, a discussion ensued. Most were pleased with the meeting, but others felt some issues were overlooked.
Landing here today, to him this is a beautiful part of our state, and it's to all of us a beautiful part. But really this place in Cayuse Landing, to me this is developed. I mean, it's not wilderness. So he really hasn't gotten into the real wilderness of Idaho that we're talking about.
For public officials who are the decision makers, the best thing that could happen to us if we could just erase the acreage figures, because that becomes most controversial, is 500,000 acres, 1.2, 1.8, 3.8. What we want to do is look at the areas and look at the industries involved, try to protect some of these pristine areas.
Most of the participants felt that the report by Chairman Seiberling would favor more wilderness than the proposed amount by Senator McClure or Governor Evans.
Well, I think without a doubt Congressman Seiberling is going to feel that more acreage should be included than is now included in the congressional delegation's bill.
I'm confident. I think that the entire Kelly drainage pretty much will go into the wilderness system as it deserves to.
He is not going to support the delegation's bill. I don't know what he might recommend, but I think we'll see a proposal by Chairman Seiberling that'll be much in excess of any reasonable amount that the majority of Idahoans would support.
I don't think he will go for Senator McClure's 500+ acre proposal. I think he'll lean more towards what the governor would propose.
I couldn't second guess what he will do, but I will say that we appreciate him coming here, taking such an interest in it, and we found him very open-minded and sympathetic toward viewing Idaho in a more diverse manner, not just as a timber state.
He's going to favor wilderness because he doesn't understand what multiple use is.
Governor Evans is the key to this. Governor Evans is the one that's going to make the decision. I mean, if once he makes up what he feels comfortable with, I think that's what Seiberling will go along with.
I can't yet tell. I know that Congressman Seiberling has talked more about the governor's proposal. I would certainly hope that he will look at the delegation's proposal as a baseline and the governor's proposal as a ceiling, and then we can work the compromise in between. If he strives for a much larger bill than the governor's proposal, then I don't think we'll have a bill in this Congress, because it'll be impossible for the delegation to accept, and I think a strong majority of the people of Idaho.
Today, on the final leg of his trip, Congressman Seiberling flew over parts of the Boise and the Sawtooth National Forests. Then they landed here at Alexander Flat on the Middle Fork of the Boise River, where they had lunch. Ellen and Jack Trueblood, wife and son of the late writer and outdoorsman Ted Trueblood, told Seiberling of their concerns.
Right down there about 2 miles is a camp that my dad started using in 1931, and we've camped there almost every year since. My mother, who camped with him there since 1931, has got something that she would like to present to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Mrs. Trueblood.
Congressman Seiberling, this is in memory of my husband, who loved the wilderness.
Ted Trueblood Hunting Treasury. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you'll enjoy it.
Well, I certainly will, and I especially enjoy having it from you. And it's got a nice little message in it. In memory of Ted Trueblood, who loved our wilderness and public land. Signed Ellen Trueblood and Jack Trueblood. Now let me ask you something. Why should this be put in wilderness? Won't it stay the same whether it's in wilderness or not?
It has stayed the same for a long, long time, but there's such an increase now in off-road vehicle use that it's important to put boundaries around things and keep from having erosion marks in the hillsides. It's not a red-hot timber area. We're not trying to take away any timber in this spot.
Mm-hmm.
There are no actively heavy producing mining claims in it, but it's fragile soil, and any kind of erosion will just...
Well, you can see anything you do up there that disturbs those slopes, they're going to start coming right down into the river, and they're bye-bye trout stream.
Mm-hmm.
I assume they're trout in this stream. You sure can't cut those trees without having it a one-shot harvest, because you'll never get them to grow again.
They would never come back, and there aren't enough there to make it economically feasible to go up here.
Oh, well, if the taxpayers will pay for it, they'll cut anything in sight.
Jim Johnson, who runs a Mountain Home Timber Company, saw it a little differently.
We're a small sawmill. We employ about 35 people, and we're concerned about managing the forest, where we've been. We want to do a proper job of managing it. And we feel that some of these slopes around here shouldn't be touched. We're not, we're not out that way.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
I worked very hard for some wilderness areas when I was up north. We worked with Senator Church on the Idaho Primitive area, and did a lot of work on those. So we're not opposed to it. We just like to know, we'd like to have it settled so we know where we are, what we can do, and we'd like to manage it properly.
Well, I think that's a very important point. Until these issues are settled, people can't make any plans. Business can't make plans. Everything's up in the air, and I've been pushing now for 5 years to get the Rare 2 issue behind us so that we can start to make some progress on those areas.
I asked the congressman what he had learned in the last 5 days flying over Idaho.
Each day I thought, well, this day has to be it. We've just seen the best, and tomorrow is obviously can't possibly be as good, and each day it's been as spectacular and as beautiful as the preceding one. I've learned that Idaho is blessed with some magnificent scenery. Most of the eastern states would give their eye teeth to have just one of your mountain ranges. And those are important economic assets. Those will attract industry to this community and this state, because industry today, and particularly high-tech industries like Hewlett-Packard, who are located in Boise, want to go where their people can experience outdoor living and wilderness and national parks, because that's what people want today.
Congressman Seiberling returns to Washington tomorrow. Republican Congressman Larry Craig, who will join us in a few moments, has predicted that the House Interior Committee will report a bill to the full House by early August. As you saw on the videotape, Seiberling found no lack of advice during his visit to Idaho, although timber industry lobbyists clearly felt that they were waging an uphill battle selling him their point of view. Joe Hinson is the director of the Idaho Forest Industry Council and the co-chairman of the Alliance for Resource and Recreation Management, a newly formed organization dedicated to lobbying for the congressional delegation's 500,000-acre proposal. Mr. Hinson, did Congressman Seiberling listen to you?
I think he heard. I'm not sure how much he listened. I think he looked a lot. I'm not sure how much he saw. My impression was he was surrounded by people that told him what they perceived he wanted to hear and showed to him what they perceived he wanted to see.
By surrounded by people, you mean what people?
Well, more the pro-wilderness folks than folks from the timber industry, for example. He did have breakfast with industry folks in St. Mary's, but that was more than offset by at least 3, perhaps 4 private get-togethers with various environmental groups, and the stops were also weighed heavily toward pro-wilderness viewpoints, I think.
You heard Senator McClure say on the tape that he wished that we, by that I'm sure he meant Idahoans, could make this decision here. Do you subscribe to that?
I subscribe to it. I don't dispute the notion that these lands belong to all Americans, but the distinction that you have to make is that only Idahoans earn their livings from these lands, and that's a very important distinction, and I do feel that that distinction was lost upon Chairman Seiberling.
So Idahoans ought to have, what, more than have a weighted influence in the issue?
I think so, and I think if you go back into the history of the establishment of the National Forest, and you go back through the various acts that have sought to treat the National Forest in one way or another, you will find a common thread that relates to the dependency of the local communities on the public lands. I think he overlooks that.
Some people see this as a rather unusual pattern, the involvement of Congressman Seiberling, although that's not a unanimous view. Why do you think he chose to get involved in Idaho's wilderness issue?
Well, I think the national environmental groups asked him to. They have elevated this issue to the Alaska land status, which was a major battle of a couple years ago, and right now they're spending enormous amounts of money in advertising and publications to sell their viewpoints on the Idaho Wilderness Bill.
What do you think is going to be the ultimate impact of his visit here? Any?
Yes, I think he's going to go back, and I think he's going to unleash a corker of a bill, and he's going to do it under the guise that he has been here and he has heard people and he has seen the areas, and use his visit as a justification for a bill that is probably much larger than most people in Idaho could support.
So despite his talk of the need for a compromise, you don't see that as likely?
I think we view compromise in 2 different ways.
Finally, let me ask you about a related but not directly related development. There's been some confusion over the Governor Evans' position, whether his 1.2 million proposed acres is a target or a ceiling, to use the words that have been used. What's your current understanding of where the governor stands?
I am just as confused as anyone. About a month ago, about 8 people from the timber industry met with the governor for lunch in Sandpoint, and he personally very clearly told us that his 1.2 million acre proposal was a maximum.
The same thing that his aide Paul Cunningham told congressional hearing.
That's
back in
exactly
March.
right. In fact, we discussed it for a while, and I made the point to Paul then that it would be very helpful if the governor would make that clear during the upcoming hearings.
He says now he doesn't understand how you could have understood him to say that.
I don't understand how he could not understand why we would get that impression. It was very clear, very clear.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Environmentalists and sportsmen fared perhaps somewhat better with the Ohio congressman. He has called Governor John Evans' proposal for 1.2 million acres a much better starting point than the delegation's proposal. Ron Mitchell is an outdoor writer and an avid sportsman. He is the Natural Resources Chairman for the Idaho Sportsmen's Coalition, an organization that supports wilderness designation for just under 3 million acres. Mr. Mitchell, first of all, am I right in assuming that you're generally pleased with Mr. Seiberling's visit?
Oh, yes, we are. We were in a pretty precarious position as sportsmen. The delegation had come out with a bill which was going to open up 88% of critical wildlife habitat as identified by the Fish and Game Department. And that was going to be opened up for development, and we went to Senator McClure in a private meeting and asked him to change his bill, and he wouldn't do that. And we went to Washington and made an appeal to congressmen in other states there, and they said they really couldn't help us. They were sympathetic, but they took their lead from Seiberling. And then we appealed to Seiberling, and he said, well, I am sympathetic and I will look into it, but he couldn't give us a definite commitment as to whether or not I'd come out here. And then, thank goodness, Governor Evans mentioned to Seiberling that things were confused out here and perhaps he ought to come out and see firsthand and do a careful analysis before any legislation was carried out. So it looks like we're going to save some of those acres that were put up on the auction block. So we're real pleased with it, yeah.
You'd credit both the national environmental groups that Mr. Hinson mentioned and also the governor.
No, well, the governor asked him to come back here, but one of the main reasons that he said he would come back was because of overwhelming support in Idaho from Idahoans. He received over 1,000 letters that were in favor of protecting these areas, and that's more letters than he's received on any bill since the Alaska Lands Bill. And we reassured him that when he came out here, he would find lands as spectacular as Alaska's and in a larger quantity than any place in the lower 48. So it was the overwhelming support of Idahoans that primarily brought him out here.
What about this contention by Senator McClure and others that it would be better if Idahoans could make this decision for themselves?
Well, Idahoans, that's one of the tragedies of the situation. This is a dramatic political scenario that's uncovering here, and people are asking, why is John Seiberling here? And this is kind of the culmination of a real drama. In the beginning, outdoorsmen, sportsmen appealed to our Idaho congressional delegation to represent us in Congress. We didn't get that representation, and then we went back and made an appeal in Washington, D.C., and what's happened is that what looked like a breakdown of the federal system in which local representatives represent us in Congress was going to break down. It's actually been a vindication because these are federal lands, this is a national issue, and in fact people from other states, congressmen, are able to help local people who are not being represented.
What's the ultimate impact? More wilderness than we'd otherwise have if the congressman hadn't been here?
Well, John Seiberling is a very strong man. He has a mind of his own, and he acts primarily on principles and on long-term values, not on short-term values. So he will not make a choice for expediency. He will give it a careful analysis. He has hinted that he has seen some areas that were not included in Senator McClure's bill that he was very impressed with.
Long Canyon for one.
Long Canyon for one. He liked the Payette Crest area somewhat. So it looks like there will be some more acreage. And if he looks at the recent polls, for instance, the one taken by this television station, which shows that a plurality of Idahoans want more wilderness, and that the least popular wilderness proposal is Senator McClure's, of which only 13% approve, then I think you'll probably go for increased acreage.
Just very briefly, how do you understand Governor Evans' position right now?
He's insisting that he didn't say that it was a cap, that he said it was a target, and I think the important thing is that he felt that there ought to be some more areas in the state, but he wasn't quite sure enough on the issue not to ask Seiberling to come out and see what he thought about the reality of the situation.
We'll come back in just a moment. The prime sponsor of the Senate bill, the state's senior Senator James McClure, has said that he welcomed Seiberling's visit, but other Republicans have been less sanguine. 1st District Congressman Larry Craig, himself a member of the Interior Committee, has accused the Ohio Democrat of using the issue for political gain. Political gain. What does it gain John Seiberling?
Oh, it gains John Seiberling an end and a continual end with his friends, Gene. John Seiberling doesn't cough unless the national environmental community asks him to. That's his basis of support. It has been historically. It has not changed. For John Seiberling to change and go in a different direction would not be of any political advantage for him. To continue down the road that has continually put him and kept him in office is the political gain.
Why do you think he got involved? Purely and simply that?
John Seiberling is a very sincere man about his beliefs. He has toured and visited a variety of areas across this nation prior to them being treated legislatively as to what management course the government wished to send those lands in. I don't question his sincerity, nor do I question his personal interests or involvement. They are above repute. He's a man who believes what he believes very strongly.
Let me ask you about one theory about why he got involved by a columnist named Steve Forrester, who writes columns for some Northwest newspapers. He says essentially that the Idaho delegation doesn't have the same clout that the Washington and Oregon delegation have, for instance, and he essentially says that Senator McClure has some clout, that you have some clout, but that's it, that he calls it your lonely fight. How do you react to that analysis?
That's his analysis of it, based on his personal bias. I think any writer that writes reflects his own bias.
You have been quoted as saying that a small but vocal minority of Idahoans is responsible for the letters to Congressman Seiberling, that most Idahoans don't favor more wilderness, and you've been asked and said you would release the poll information on which you base that. What can you tell us about where you do get that information?
Gene, I think I am accurate in depicting the majority of the Idaho public's interests as being no more or very little additional wilderness. And I say that starting with polls that were taken clear back in 1978 through to the current time, almost all of them being in the high 50s or low 60s, some of them even up into the 70s.
Saying no more wilderness?
Saying no more or very little more. And I think that's a distinction because Ron mentioned a poll a couple of minutes ago. I believe if the figures are accurate, that 42% said no more, 7% said, well, somewhere near or about the delegations. That's about 49%. But look at the sampling. I don't know of any pollster in this country that would say, based on a 1 million population base, as we're dealing with here in Idaho in round terms, that if you choose a 5 to 6% variable, you stay under about 500 sampling. I believe this was 360. The other polls I talk about are 500, up to a survey that I took that was 27,000 respondents.
And what did that show?
That 27,000 respondents, in large part, excuse me, let me correct that. 23,000 respondents in a questionnaire. A
self-selecting questionnaire.
A question done by a professional pollster and sent out to all of my constituents in the district. Said about 73% really didn't want any more wilderness. Now, be that as it may, the question is not that we are or are not going to have any more. We are going to have some more based on a solution to the Rare II process. The question then remains, how much?
How critical is it that some agreement be reached quickly?
I think it's very critical in this session of Congress that we arrive at an agreement. And I say that, Gene, because if we fail to, and there are some groups in this state who I'm sad to say are selfish enough to say if you don't agree with us, then we'll fight to have nothing. That's a very wrong point of view. We slow down, stop, or sidetrack for a time the planning process of the Forest Service, which could well mean down the road by 1986, mills standing idle and men and women out of work in this state, not because of interest rates, not because of a recession or any nature of the economy, but because the Forest Service was not allowed to plan. Therefore, woods and timber that is available would simply not be available.
Does the compromise have to be somewhere between the congressional delegation's 500,000 and the governor's 1.2?
I would hope that it could fall somewhere in that acreage range.
Let me open this up and go back to Mr. Mitchell. How do you react to the idea of a compromise in that range?
You mean from the outdoors and sportsman's point
Yes.
of view?
Yes.
Uh,
Under the governor's proposal. in
Yeah,
other words.
well, I think it's quite inadequate. I think the Fish and Game Department is staffed by biologists. They have stated that the critical wildlife habitat in the state, now not just good, not just excellent country, but the critical wildlife habitat in the state is 1.8 million acres. And that's considerably above the governor's proposal. And I think that ought to be the bottom line of what hunters and fishermen are willing to accept in this state. After all, the latest figures that are coming in from the Forest Service show that we don't have 8 million roadless acres. They've just done a new tally, and it's come up to 9.5. And we're only talking about 4 and 5% of these roadless forest lands.
So
and I
something
think
in the neighborhood of a million simply wouldn't be.
Oh, no, that'd be entirely
You'd rather see a bill like that die.
From the point of outdoorsmen.
Mr. Hinson, is the situation as critical as Congressman Craig describes it, that some solution be reached this year?
Yes, it is, and it'll be more critical as time goes on and as our markets come back, which we certainly hope that they will. Some people have said, the governor has said, for example, that, well, your problem is not with wilderness, your problem is with high interest rates. That's true today, but the situation that we don't want to get in is one in which the market is strong and timber supply is limited, and so we still have the same economic problems that we've experienced for the past several years, just for lack of available timber supply.
How likely is it, do you think, that your lobbying groups and others can keep the compromise number under, let's say, the governor's 1.2 figure?
Oh, that's a real fuzzy crystal ball, and I don't know quite how to answer that, Gene. We'll just do the job as best we can, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Mitchell if he's willing to give us a theory on how likely it is that your side will be able to get the number above that.
Above 1.8?
Well, at least above 1.2, above the governor's.
We really don't know at this stage. We're hoping for more. There are certainly some areas that are deserving of protection that the governor has left out of his proposal. Some very critical mountain goat range in the Lemhis and Italian Peaks areas.
Of course, you can change some borders without, change the boundaries without changing numbers, too.
Yeah, that's true. But like I say, we started, with the assumption that there were 8 million acres, and rather than to try to play an acres game, we just looked at the resources, and we tried to come out as low as we possibly could. And so we can change boundaries and we can change numbers, but we're pretty much down at the base.
We have only about 20 seconds left. Let me let Congressman Craig have the last word. A compromise, or does it go all the way to the conference committee in an all-out fight?
I think we're going to try to work a compromise if we can. The governor can play a key role in this by standing firm on his current position instead of waffling like he has over the last couple of weeks. I hope he'll do that. See, let me close by saying, as we flew down over the top of the Selway Bitterroot the other day, I said, John Seiberling, look south. It was a clear day. We were at 15,000 feet. I said, as far as the eye can see and the mind can imagine, that's all wilderness. He said, Congressman, I can see why you say Idahoans really don't want any more.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. We are very late. That's all the time we have. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Jean McNeil. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.